We're now on Daf Yud Ches Amid Beis. And the Gemara just established that the reason why we're going to be matir tvila of an Adam Tameh on Yontif is because the act of tvila is not obvious for the sake of tvila and tikkun gavra, because the onlooker will think that he's doing it lemekar, he's cooling off. So the Gemara says, Tainach, that makes sense, bimos hachama, when people cool off because of the heat. But bimos haksham, if he's going into the waters during the winter, cold winter months, when nobody would normally go in there to wash and to cool off, ma'ikal memar, how are we going to explain the heter tefillah during the winter months? And the Gemara answers, and the Gemara is looking now for a reality, a scenario in which even during the winter months he might jump into the water. And he comes from the fields and he's full of filth on his body, and therefore and he washes himself. So even in the case of Tovel Bimos Hagshamim, it doesn't necessarily look like he's being Tovel L'Shem Tikkun for purposes of Tara. Gemara says Tainik with Shabbos. That makes sense on Shabbos. And you could say that it's not Nire Kimisakin Kitikun on Shabbos because he's allowed to wash himself on Shabbos in order to clean his body. But B'Yom HaKippurim, Rechit is one of the 5 Inuyim on Yom HaKippurim, and part of the mitzvah V'Nisem, Ma'ikal Meimar. And Rashi points out that there are many Chayvei Tfilos that are Tovel B'Yom HaKippurim. That's based on a Beitza that the Gemara is going to quote a little bit later on. How can we permit Tvila on Yom HaKippurim when nobody would say, well, he's cooling off or he's cleaning himself off? He's not allowed to clean himself off. There's no washing on Yom HaKippurim. And obviously the spectator is going to think that he's doing it for the Shem Tikkun. The Maisa is Muchach, that it's the Shem Tikkun. Even though the Gemara establishes at the end of Yoma that even on Yom Kippur, there's certain rechitzos which are not L'Shem Tanug. For example, Meluchach B'Tit V'Tzoa, he's allowed to wash himself. However, that would only allow him to wash certain parts of his body where there's lichluch and tzoa, but not to jump into a mikvah and wash his entire body. Omar Rava, we have a principle called hoil. Mi kamidi de b'Shabbos shari ubiyom HaKippurim. We cannot institute a gzera. Again, we're only talking about gzeras to Rabbana. And Shabbos is more chomer than Yom Kippur. Machal Shabbos is chayev mitzas pesdim, whereas Yom Kippur is only a chiv kares. And Rava now applies the principle of hoil. Hoil. What does this mean, hoil? Ela hoil ub'Shabbos shari, b'Yom HaKippurim shari. According to this principle of hoil, we cannot prohibit something on Yom Kippur that's permissible on Shabbos. And if Tvila is permissible on Shabbos, then ipso facto it must be permissible on Yom Kippur, because otherwise people are going to say mistakenly that Yom Kippur is more chomer than Shabbos. Again, this only applies to that which is asur mirabbanan b'shum gzeira, and the Rabbana will not institute a gzeira for the same action and prohibit on Yom Kippur if it's permissible on Shabbos. And if it's Tvila, since it's permissible on Shabbos, it is therefore permissible on Yom Kippur. And now the Gemara is going to go into a long analysis as to whether Rava, in fact, accepted this principle of hoil. There seems to be a contradiction. Umi islay le Rava hoil. And to introduce the next section about whether Rava accepted hoil, and I will say the following. We have a contradiction between a Mishnah in Masechet Shabbos and a Beitza in Masechet Shabbos regarding the question of gargling with oil in order to calm down what we call ke'evei garon. He's got problems with his throat, and normally the Rabbanon prohibited refuah on Shabbos, and that's because of Gzeira Shema Yitzchak b'Simonim. You might do Sabamonim, you might do Shchika Sabamonim. And the Mishnah establishes in Shabbos HaChoshesh B'Shinav, if his gums or his teeth are in bad shape, or his throat, then Lo Yigameh B'Enes HaChometz. He's not allowed to use vinegar in order to calm down the pain and the sensitivity, because normally during the week, if it wasn't Shabbos, no one would do this gargling with vinegar unless it was for the purpose of refuah. So this is clearly an act of refuah. Avol metabel hu kedarko. He's allowed to take a piece of a slice of bread, soak it in vinegar, and eat it the way he would eat it during the week, because then it's not included in the Isur Refuah, because the Isur Refuah only applies to that which is obviously L'Shem Refuah. So to take the chometz straight away, that would be L'Shem Refuah clearly, and that's also on Shabbos. But if he dips his bread into the vinegar, and he gets the vinegar in, and hopefully it'll solve and heal his problems, but it's not nikar, it's not obvious that he's doing it as an act of refuah, because it's exactly what he would do during the week. Hence, it's not included in the Isur Refuah. And that's the Mishnah. The Mishnah, notice, completely and absolutely prohibits Yigameh. Verminin Allah, but we ask a steer from a Tosefta, Beitza, and the Tosefta is going to allow Gemiyah of vinegar under certain conditions. Lo Yigameh b'Poled, although the Beitza certainly prohibits gargling and then spitting it out, that's clearly for the sake of refuah. But avol megamea ubolea, if he gargles with it and then swallows the vinegar, then it's not clear that he's doing it for the purpose of refuah, and hence it is permissible. But this Beitza indicates that if he changes after the Gemiyah to a Belia, then it's mutter. Why? Because that's not the normal way you would do it for refuah purposes. You would spit out the vinegar. Here he's swallowing the vinegar. It must be that he wants to swallow vinegar, even though you and I would not really be happy about swallowing vinegar. But one thing is clear, that the Beitza, for the sake of this chola, is lenient with gomea. Megamea is mutter. And the Mishnah requires tvila, that he dip his bread into the oil or into the vinegar, and he's not allowed to do anything that is obviously refuah if he were to be megamea without dipping it into his, dipping his bread into the vinegar. And yet the Beitza says megamea boleh. Why didn't the Mishnah offer that alternative that could be permissible of megamea v'boleh? Amar Abaye. And now we have two different answers to try to reconcile this apparent contradiction. Abaye's answer is ki tnan nami masnisen. When the Mishnah prohibits megamea, it meant, we have to add another descriptive adjective here, megamea upolet. He gargles with it and then he spits it out. That's clearly refuah, and that's prohibited. But the Beitza, which is no contradiction to that, is going to say that megamea boleh is mutter. So both the Beitza and the Mishnah agree that a boleh without a plita, without spitting it out, is mutter. It's not muchach that it's l'shem refuah. Rav Amar, Rava takes his own initiative to reconcile this contradiction. Afilu tema megamea ubolea. Even if you were to argue that the Mishnah, when it says megamea, which is prohibited, it prohibits even megamea ubolea, even if he swallows the vinegar. but nevertheless lo kasha. Kan kodem tibul v'kan li'achar tibul. Now, the only factor here that could be relevant to be matir here is that he's doing it the way he would do it during the week. And that's going to be a case of kodem tibul. The Beitza is going to say that in a case of kodem tibul, he hasn't yet gotten to the point in his meal when he normally would dip his bread into the vinegar. And they used to do this on a daily basis. Part of the Suda was always to take bread and dip it into vinegar. If somebody sees him taking the vinegar into his mouth, then he's going to think that he probably did it derech tibul, meaning, although he sees that, the onlooker sees that the vinegar is going down the throat, but he thinks that how did he get it down his throat? He must have done a tibul first, because it's before tibul, and on a regular basis he does tibul. So once the spectator justifies the action by assuming that there was a tibul, then it's mutter, because it's not nikar that he's doing it l'shem refuah if the onlooker thinks it was after tibul. But the Mishnah that did not offer that possibility of megamea ubolea, it was because it's liachar tibul. He had already done his tibul. So now if he's after his tibul, nobody's going to say, well, he's doing another tibul, although on one night of the year we do two tibul. But rather he's going to assume that it's l'shem refuah. And therefore it's also, if he's boleh, again, if he's poleh, then for sure it's always us. But now we're saying even if he's boleh and only boleh, not poleh, still prohibited because it's after Tvila. So now the Gemara is ready for its kasha. So if Rava actually holds from the principle of Hoil, Nema, why don't we say hold the kodem tibul shari liachar tibul nami shari? Let's explain. We're not going to divide up Shabbos into two parts with different dinim in the morning and different dinim in the afternoon. Just like we equated according to Rava Shabbos and Yom Kippur, we certainly should equate the first half of the Shabbos with the second half of Shabbos. So that if kodem tibul, you would allow him to drink, right, to gargle with this vinegar, and that's because the onlooker is going to say that he did it with tibul. Then even after tibul, we're going to have to be matir because we can't split the Shabbos into two parts. Hoil is going to work in this way. If we equate Yom Kippur with Shabbos as a kal vachomer here, even though they're different days with different kedushos, b'vadei how much more so, we should be mashve the shows of Shabbos itself from the morning to the evening, from before tibul till the after tibul. And we're not going to set up these chilukei dinim. It's therefore Hadar Bei Rava Me'ahi. Rava now retracts his answer to Masechet Shabbos, and he's not going to be mechalik between kodem tibul yachad tibul. He's going to accept Abaye's interpretation at the Mishnah that prohibited gmias chometz is talking about a case of gomea upolet. But if he's bolea, then it's always going to be mutter, whether it's before tibul or after tibul. And that's what Rava held originally. But liachar shechazer bo Rava shetam isra atvolas kelu b'Shabbos u'bnei shenirkim esaken u'tfilas adam uteres mipnei shenirkim mekar u'biyom ha'kippurim mitam hoil u'b'Shabbos muter gam biyom ha'kippurim muter. So we cannot apply the Nira Miyaker Svara on the case of Yom Kippurim, but we can apply the principle of Hoil. So Gemara right away asks, all right, Rava seems to have changed his mind, but Mimai, how do you know that he changed his mind about the din of Tmias Chometz? Dilma Mehar Hadar. Maybe he changed his mind here in the case of Tefillah on Yom Kippurim, and he retracted his original heta to say that Hoil it's mutar on Shabbos, therefore it's mutar Yom Kippurim. After he changed his mind, then he said the Gmias Chometz Muteres Kodem Tibul V'Asur Liachar Tibul. The Gemara is suggesting it. Maybe he was chozer both from the Tefillah on Yom Kippurim, and he says, I'm going to reject Hoil, and it's going to be also. Gemara says, Lo Sal Gedai. There's no way you can maintain that Rava's position is that Tibul on Yom Kippurim is us. This Sanya, we have an explicit brayso, Kol Chayvei Tfilos. If a person is Chayv Tfilah and the time for his tefillah coincides with Shabbos or with Yom Kippur or Tisha B'Av, is tovli kedarkon. They can do a tefillah in the normal way, ein b'Tisha B'Av, u'ein b'Yom Kippurim. Even though these are days that are also in Rechitza, and therefore, according to Rava, we're going to have to say that there's a heta tefillah on Yom Kippurim midin hoil. That's explicit here in this brayso. So therefore, if he was chozer, he must have been chozer regarding the distinction between Tibul before, between the Gomea before Tibul or the Gomea after Tibul. So let's just summarize. The reason for the Isur Tvilas Kalim, as we saw on Daf Yud Ches Amud Aleph, on Shabbos and Yontiv, divides up into 4 different views. One view is Gzeir Shem Yavirenu Al Rav Amos B'Sharam. Another opinion is Gzeir Shem Yischad. Third is Gzeir Shem Yisheh, which is the problem of Truma. And fourth is Nire Kimisake. And the price that we learned on Amud Aleph, that according to one man Omar, there is a Gzeira Shema Yisha, that certainly supports that one opinion. The Mishnah continues, V'shavin shemashikin es hamayim. Both Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai agree with regard to Tfilas Mayim. No, Tfilas Adam is machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai. But even Beis Hillel would be machmir with regard to the kli. It says mashikin es hamayim. So the water was contaminated by tumah, and you can now use a kli even for purposes of tvila, of hashaka, because a kli even is not makabel tumah, but another keli would be awesome. My avalomat bilin. What does the Mishnah mean when it says avalomat bilin? Amar Shmuel ein mat bilin es hakli al gav meimav litaro biyontif. Shmuel says we are absolutely prohibiting the tefillah of a kli agav mayim. In other words, if a kli needs tefillah, we're not going to allow him to put mayim tmeim in the kli and then do ashak in order to, as a subterfuge, harama, in order to be mitayar the kli. So this is what the Mishnah means when it says avalo matbil. We cannot justify our Mishnah not according to Rebbe nor according to Rabbanon. The Sanya we learned to the Beitza. Ein matbilin es hakli. We're talking about a kli tameh. Al gabi meimov kidei l'taro. V'ein mashikin es hamayim. So he wants to be mitayr mayim, and we're not going to allow him to do hashaka, even in a kli even. Divrei Rebbe. V'chachamim omrim matbilin kli al gabi meimov l'taro. U'mashikin es hamayim b'kli even l'taro. So let's work out this machlokes as it applies to the Bryce. Mani. Whose shita, Rebbe or the Chacham, is reflected in the Bryce? Rebbe, if you can argue it's Rebbe, is kasha ashaka. Ashaka is mentioned here. And Rebbe would hold that it's awesome. Why? Because Rebbe said, "Ein matbilin sakli al gabi meimov v'ein mashikin es hamayim." So Rebbe clearly says that Ashaka is awesome. Our Mishnah says explicitly Ashaka is mutar and yont. The Ira Banan is kashat bola. So the din of Atbola, which is mentioned here, is difficult. Our Mishnah says that Atbolas kli agabi meimov is also, and the Chacham in our Brisa say it's mutter. The Gemara offers two different possible roads to your answers. Ibois Ema, you could give the following answer, Rebbe. Ibois Ema Rabbana. How does it work out, either according to Rabbanon or according to Rebbe? Ibois Ema Rebbe is Reisha, the Brisa B'Yontiv, the Sefer B'Shabbos, the beginning of the Brisa that deals with Hatbolas Kli Agav Meimov, that's talking about Yontiv. The Sefer of the Brisa with Hashakas Mayim and a Kli Even, that's on Shabbos. So what comes out now? That according to Rebbe, Hatbolas Kli Agav Meimov Asura. Certainly, at this point, we're maintaining that according to Rebbe, there's no way, no how that you could matbil a Kli Agav Meimov. In fact, Sefer B'Shabbos so what does it mean, Sefer B'Shabbos? In the case of Atbolas Kli Agav Meimar, it's always Asura. In the case of Ashakas Mayim B'Kli Even, it's always Mutter. No, I'm sorry, it's Mutter only on Yont, but not on Shabbos. Chachamim hold that Ashak in a Kli Even is Mutter always. Hatbolas Kli Agav Meimov is only prohibited on Shabbos. So now we can reconcile our Mishnah like Rebbe, and we'll say Kula Masnisin be Yontif. The entire Mishnah from beginning to end is talking about Yontif, and therefore the Mishnah prohibits Hatbolas Kli Agav Meimov, just like Rebbe said, it was also. He tira Ashakas Mayim B'Kli Even. Why is it mutter to Ashakas Mayim B'Kli Even? But Neshagam Rebbe lo asel b'Shabbos Ubiyontif Modeh Shashakas Mayim Uteres. So the Bryce is talking about Yontif. Iboy same on the top of your test. Rabbanon v'kula masisa b'Shabbos. I can work out these Mishnah and the Mishnah of the Bryce according to Rabbanon, and we're talking about Tchilas of Yontif, so for Shabbos, and the whole Mishnah. Our Mishnah is Shabbos. So if you ask me why was the Mishnah matir Ashakas Mayim b'Kli Even, so just like the Chacham in the Brisa were matir even on Shabbos, but again, Hatbolas Kli Agav Meimav is Asura, because even the Chachamim were only matir on Yontif but not on Shabbos. On Shabbos, they concede that Hatbolas Kli Agav Meimav is Asura. And that reflects the general rule that we're more machmir on Shabbos than on Yom. I just want to add a few lines from Daf Tesvav and Beis that we omitted inadvertently. So if you look on Tesvav and Beis, 4 lines up before the end of the Yomid, V'yomer Rab Yochim B'Shum Rab Lazar Rab Shimon, Harotzeh she'is kaimu nechasav. If he wants to buy a field, let's say, and we always have a fear of gazlonim, so Rabbi Yochanan has a recommendation. Yita bahen eder. He should plant in his field a tree called an eder. Rashi calls it ilan srak. The Aruch says it's a min shel erez. It's a cedar tree. And it's a choshev ilan. How does that choshev ilan prevent gzela? Shmo yotze lemerchak b'pi abrios. Everybody knows from one corner of the world to the other that so-and-so has planted and successfully planted an adar tree, eder tree. And if everybody identifies this as his eder tree, the one who planted it, and since his name is always on it, if let's say he travels in a long distance and somebody else comes along and says, I'm going to make a chazaka on this and claim it for myself, there'll always be Eidim to testify that it belonged to its rightful owner. And no one could claim that he purchased the Ilan, unless he has proof to that effect. Not only that, but if he had purchased it, then it would be a kol. It would be a public knowledge. Everybody would have access to that knowledge. The rumors would get around. Because the Erez is always Nikral, the Eder is always Nikral Shmo. And Nemar, and we prove this from a Pasuk in Tilim, Adir B'Marom Hashem. According to Rabbeinu Chananel and the Aruch, this is a Musar Shmuz about a person who wants to be Mekayim his Nechasim. He should plant Eder, meaning he should invest in staka. Shehi chashuv l'fnei Hashem b'amorim shenemar emes me'oretz titzmach v'tzedek mishamayim nishkaf. According to the Meiri, the Musar here is that a person who wants his nechasim to remain yiskaimu nechasim b'yadav, then he should plant an eder tree because he will always remember the name Eder, and he will always therefore think of Adir B'Marom Hashem. Inami, the Gemara now gives another explanation to the word and the significance of Eder. Adra Kishmei. What does that mean? Adra Kishmei, Kidamri Inchi, my Adra de Kaimo Lidore Dore. people spoke about the Adra as something that is retained in the family from one generation to the other. Tanyanami Hochi, Sode, Sheyesh Ba Eder, Einon Ixeles, Bi Einon Echmeses. If you plant this special eder tree, then no one will be able to steal it. Everybody knows it belongs to you, and no one could force you against your will to sell it. And the fruits of this eder tree will always be maintained in your possession, because enough of merubim, there are many branches, and he can use those branches as a fence around the eder tree, and that's going to prevent anyone from stealing his parents. Thank you very much.